We are now in the post-lunch session, and I recognize Senator Lisa Cummins as our next speaker.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. It was not my intention to speak on this bill, Mr. President, largely because I think it is known to all that I am supportive of the two items which are being discussed in this cognate debate. And so I am not in the habit, Mr. President, of supporting just for supporting's sake, speaking for speaking's sake, Mr. President. But since we are surrounded by those who are committed to opposing for opposing's sake, I took the opportunity instead, Mr. President, to rise on my feet. Mr. President, I want to answer a couple of questions that have been raised in this place and in other spaces, because it is important that we keep the narrative clear. Mr. President, we, from May 2018, were asked about the government of Barbados defaulting on our debt. We were roundly criticized, Mr. President, by all of those who had the luxury of waxing philosophical on the outside and were not in a position of having to answer to the people of Barbados who expected results about why this was not to be. But we have since then come to see the wisdom of why that had to be. And even though there are those who are committed to not rationalizing why, and they will continuously move the goalposts, Mr. President, we defaulted on the debt. We knew that we could not send that level of FX because we had an imminent payment coming up, and we had to make the decision. When we completed the domestic debt restructuring, Mr. President, there were those who stood in this very chamber and who said, there is no need for rejoicing because where is the external debt restructuring? And in every subsequent contribution, Mr. President, the question was, what about the debt restructuring? But today now we hear there should be no euphoria over debt restructuring, as if we did not understand that it was yet to come. So I want to respond to some of those things, Mr. President, because we are not in the business of trying to move the continuous goalpost by saying, where is the debt restructuring? No, the debt restructuring. Where is the external debt restructuring? Don't rejoice over the external debt restructuring. What are we rejoicing over, Mr. President? If not the acceptance by a people as early as 2013 that something had to be done. This is not something that happened in May 2018, Mr. President, except insofar as it related to taking action. We knew these things were coming. We have settled the external debt, and we have settled the domestic debt. And as we speak about the differences in the agreements governing the two arrangements, Mr. President, now I have no defense to make of domestic creditors who were predators and not just creditors over an extended period of time and who benefited from obscene levels of profits, while knowing that the paper they were buying in some instances was at the expense of ordinary Barbadians. I have no tears to shed, Mr. President, for those domestic creditors. So I am not going to say to those external creditors that rather than 1,000 workers going home, that we should have taken the advice of a former governor of the central bank, who then turned around and became the advisor to said external creditors, trying to make sure that they could squeeze blood from tears and water from stone of the people of Barbados. Mr. President, we decided that we were not going to put labor on the front line. So when we hear about the alternatives to that which is now painful, we knew, Mr. President, it was always going to be difficult. Mr. President, we run households. We may not run countries, and some of us are even farther removed from running countries than others. But we don't run countries. We don't have national responsibilities, and even some of us are even less national than others, Mr. President. But in our own households, we know that if we are running a household and we are encountering difficulties. I believe Senator Greenidge raised a point earlier. He was talking about the commercial banks. And he was saying, when people run into difficulties with the commercial banks, what happens? No, Mr. President, let's be honest. If I have in my little house a mortgage, and I run into trouble, I'm going to have to go and sit at the feet of the bankers, and I'm going to say, beg your blind, give me a little time. Give me a little opportunity to raise the money to meet the need. Mr. President, during the time in the event that the bank says yes, we're going to help you. You don't have any more income coming from anywhere else because everything popped down, as the young people would say. Everything is a problem. You have to hold strain. So the people who run households in this country, who can extract what is necessary at a national level in terms of being able to hold strain or having, Mr. President, to hold strain, are the same people who, if the car stops working while they're holding strain, they know they gotta hold off for a little bit. They gotta go and beg the mechanic, you could help me out to fix this car because I still have to get to work. These are the same people that are asking where all the trucks come from, where the trucks are, why the garbage ain't getting picked up. What happened? Because they suddenly dropped from Mars, Mr. President, and did not know prior to May 2018 that the country had no money. And did not know post-May 2018 that we defaulted on the debt, even though they spoke about it ad nauseum. They did not know that we had domestic debt to restructure, and they lamented about the failure to restructure the external debt, Mr. President. But all of a sudden, where are all of these things? As if the government of Barbados has a pot of gold sitting at the end of a rainbow guarded by a leprechaun who frittled it away from the people of Barbados when they were in government in the last 10 years. We don't have those parameters available to us, Mr. President, and that is why these bills are important. That is why we have to come to a place, Mr. President, where we accept that the bills before us and the bills that have been before us for the last close to 18 months have set this country on a trajectory where we are not just restructuring the domestic debt, not just restructuring the external debt, but we are responding to a medium-term fiscal strategy, for example, that never worked in any of its maybe 100 incarnations. At no time. We are responding to a circumstance, Mr. President, where we were told that sovereign debt rankings did not matter. Yet we are now in a position where every single development partner is lining up at our door to say what you are doing is working. But there are those, Mr. President, who want to oppose for opposing's sake, who all of a sudden are buying into the narrative that I thought we left long before, that external opinions like that don't matter. They do, Mr. President, they do. The IMF, who is overseeing this BERT program, which is a homegrown program, has said we are on the right track. And I'm not speaking in technical terms today, Mr. President, because I'm conscious of what my colleague, Senator, when she opened said, Senator McConnell said, people believe that sometimes we get too technical. So I can talk comfortably about the householder who understands what it is to hold strain. I can talk comfortably about the householder who has to make sure that their mortgage is balanced, and if they're running into difficulty, knows what it is to go and sit in front of the bank and ask for a blind. They understand what it is in this country as well, not to be able to do everything all at once. And certainly not to put people on the front line if they don't have to, Mr. President. So it troubles me when I hear some of the conversations that we are having, Mr. President. I want to say a few things. I want to say that despite these circumstances, despite the challenges that this government has faced, and despite the absence of that pot of gold that everyone seems to be convinced exists somewhere, that what this government has done is brought back to the table a couple of important things that cannot be questioned. Investor confidence. Investor confidence. We heard earlier about these projects that are supposed to happen. But let us be clear about the ones that could not happen before because there was no confidence in Barbados. I happen to know enough of the people who are attempting to do business in this country over many years who would say that they came to these parts of the world with interesting projects that they thought would turn a country and a sector and a people around. And they sat across from persons who were responsible for leading this nation and in whose hands sat choices to make good ones or bad ones. And after making exceptional presentations, Mr. President, I have had more than one person say to me, would you believe that the only question the people had to ask me is, what's in it for me? You heard that the length and breadth of this country. I have had people who have walked away from investment in this country because they refused to answer that question, what's in it for me? They did a business elsewhere. And so this government, with all of these measures, painful as they are, and we accept that, but necessary as they must be, and we know that, Mr. President, has brought back investor confidence to this country. These measures have done just that. We have brought back, and I'm sure some of my other colleagues are going to talk in greater detail about the surpluses that this government has brought back as well. We talk about the debt restructuring and we talk about the debt reserves. Mr. President, we have brought back a level of foreign exchange cover in this country that we did not have before. Now, if we don't have the export cover, the minimum amount of foreign exchange reserves, giving us the export cover, Mr. President, one of our neighbors, as we speak today, a few months ago, their dollar was 128 to 1. Today it is 142 to 1 and sliding. Dropped 27 cents between yesterday and today. What would they have preferred? A devaluation of the Barbados dollar? Would we have been competing with other countries instead? Are those the options that were on the table for them? Or are we going to stay this course with these measures even though they are difficult? Mr. President, I stand to my feet today not because I want to support for supporting sake, not because I want to speak for speaking sake, but because I am tired of people opposing for opposing sake. We have to be rational. Let's stop putting these false narratives out there in the minds of people that do not represent what we know to be the correct position, Mr. President. Let's stop casting aspersions and dropping those snide remarks that those who don't know any better will hold on to without having been given the context for what is real and what is true. Let's not do that, Mr. President, because we know that we were in an extraordinarily difficult position that should have been resolved since 2013, Mr. President. And the failure to do so put this government in a position where it had few options but to make the decisions that it made in the time that it made it. And we have seen the results even under those circumstances of those decisions, Mr. President. So we are comfortable with the return of investment confidence, investor confidence. We're comfortable with the return of surpluses. We're comfortable with the increases in debt reserves. We're comfortable that we have not had to put our workers on the front line. We're comfortable that those who are hiding behind obscene levels of interest rates, obscene levels of profits, are now those who are helping to carry the burden, that they too are sharing the burden, and we have no tears to shed for them, Mr. President. And we are not going to give the narrative out there either that there was a them and that there was an us, because if the Barbadians who are the domestic creditors who benefited when times were good and profited when times were bad are not those who are invested in helping to rebuild this country, and we want to externalize that on those on the outside, then something is fundamentally wrong with the notion of patriotism in this country. We made a decision that we ourselves, the Barbadian people, in every incarnation, including our domestic creditors, were going to carry and share this burden. It was not somebody else's external responsibility to fix, it was ours. We pay our bills domestically, we pay them externally, but we take responsibility for our problem because it is our children and our grandchildren that have to live in this country. And so, Mr. President, I only rose for the purpose of being able to respond to those particular points. And I want to be able to say that we have to take responsibility for our own affairs. There is no savior coming in on to save us. There is no one coming to save Barbados but Barbadians. And this government and this administration will not wax philosophical with the future of Barbados. We will take the decisions, we will take responsibility, and we will set Barbados on a trajectory for success. And with those few words, Mr. President, I give my full support to these two items.
Senator Nurse, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise also to lend my support to this bill and also the resolution which we are discussing as a cognate debate. I will take the opportunity to congratulate the government on being able to bring this negotiation to a conclusion. We and Senator Cummings made the point that the question was being raised as to the length of time, and so that it was taken to get to this position. And I think it is not being negative or anything, but the fact that we need to recognize that it was necessary to put this in place as quickly as possible, because it meant it was necessary in order to be able to start to reverse see a reversal in our credit ratings. This, I think, will have a positive impact on getting our credit ratings back up. As that happens, that is when the investor confidence will come back. And as we are all eagerly looking forward to see those external investment flows coming back into the country. That is very important, because mention has been made about the surpluses that we've seen in the last year, and so. But the fact is that you have to remember this was all in the context of not servicing that debt for the last year as well. And so you have to recognize that what is going to be key as we go forward, having settled this restructuring, is the growth. The growth is what is going to now be required to generate the income on which hopefully the government will be able to pull in more taxation and therefore do a number of things in terms of social and other aspects that are necessary. We heard mention of the garbage and transportation and so on. And hopefully, having gotten this ease and this space and getting to this point, we will now be able to do some of the other things that government has been promising. Again, just so back in May of 2018, a lot was promised. A lot was promised to the people of Barbados, and therefore, if people are asking what is happening to the transportation system, what is happening to the garbage, etc., it is because a lot was promised. And I, for one, would wish to think that, as I said, having settled where we are, that we're going to now be able to move on, and the government is going to be able to do a number of the other things which has been promised. There are some aspects particularly of this restructuring which I think were good aspects. For example, being able to negotiate a 30% haircut in principle, and to be able to negotiate a much lower rate, albeit a rate which is still much higher than what the local domestic debt holders are getting. But in terms of when we put it in the context of what some interest rates as high as Senator McConnell reminded us of 13%, I think it is very. We are fortunate to have been able to do this level of negotiation. Um, one of the things that I did not hear but that mentioned during the debate is the fact that I am under the impression that the restructuring has not been accepted by 100% of the external creditors. What I would have liked to hear is what happens to those, and I don't know what portion, what percentage have accepted and what is the remainder that has not accepted, but I would be interested to know what happens to those who have not been part of this accepting the restructuring. When we did the domestic debt restructuring, of course, we brought a bill was brought before this Senate, which we approved, which effectively said if 90% of the bondholders accepted, then the remaining were required to accept the same conditionalities. Is a similar thing happening in this case to those of the external creditors who are not accepting? I would also wish, for example, to know, is there an arbitration clause which is going to be in this new arrangement? Is there going to be an opportunity for the creditors to be able to adjust, for example, the interest rate if, let's say, certain conditions are not met? For example, we know that government is committed to the BERT program, and under the BERT program, we know, for example, the government is committed to meeting certain surpluses each year and other targets which have been set out. If these targets are not met, I just would like to know, does this give these external creditors the right to come back and renegotiate? I don't know. It's just a question that I would be very interested to hear. Another good aspect, though, Mr. President, which I like about this restructuring, is the amortization of the debt. I am always a little bothered about when we negotiate debts and then you have the situation where you service the debt, you pay the interest on an annual basis or whatever, and then some 10 years or whenever, you have these huge balloon payments to make. And that very often is what causes or creates the problem for governments. Therefore, having this amortization of the debt where you pay on an annual basis and you reduce the debt gives the government a much better opportunity of managing its cash flows. And in the circumstances of very tight foreign reserves, positions, and so on, it is very, very important that government has this ability to be able to properly plan and manage its cash flows position. And so I think that as well is another good aspect of being able to deal with this restructuring of the debt. The other thing I would also think is good is the clause which allows the catastrophe, I think it is called, or the disaster the aspect, which allows the government a little space should we have some disaster like a hurricanes or floodings or earthquakes, which gives the government an opportunity to catch to catch its breath, as it were, to get back on its feet. And again, that should bode well for being able to service this day. The other thing I would like to know, and perhaps it is something that needs more discussion, is the haircut sufficient? And that is not a case of keep moving the goalposts or as Senator Cummings might suggest, but the point is that we have seen in many other jurisdictions where an initial negotiation and restructuring of debt was done, and then a couple of years after, it had to be redone because in the first place, what was negotiated was not adequate enough. And we've seen our friends in the Caribbean, in Jamaica and Belize and some other places where this situation has arisen. And that is important to know because we have, as I said, to take that in the context of, we have to take that in the context of our being on the board program and being required to meet certain conditionalities that we have agreed on. So, Mr. President, I was not intending to be very long. I just wanted to raise those few comments. As I said, I want desperately to see and to hear more about all of these investments and about all these investors that are lining up, because it is going to be important to see that growth projected. We know, for example, that the central bank is predicting negative growth again for this year. And that cannot continue. That cannot continue if we are to meet our conditions under the board program. And therefore, I wish the government well. I would like to think that having settled this restructuring program, that we are now in a place where we will see a takeoff of a number of these investments and seeing the country return to a state of positive growth. So with those few remarks, Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I shouldn't delay the Senate for very long. I didn't even intend to speak on these resolutions. And like Senator Nurse, I wish the government well. Because if the government doesn't do well, the people who Senator Moore and I represent don't do very well at all. You know, but I must speak to some issues. And the first one I will speak about is something that Senator Grinnell said. You know, this program that we're in I call it Ernie and Bert program, you call it whatever you feel like calling it, has caused a lot of people to lose jobs. And as a result, they lost homes, husbands, and everything else they lost as a result. Yeah, they don't want to find somebody else. The problem here, sir, is that the government went on this program to restructure, and the numbers look good. But you are not looking at the underlying things, the people at the bottom. You know, everybody, it looks good at the top, you know. But the civil servant who had one salary and no other job, who's gone home, who is now in danger of losing his home, and You know, I remember some person also told me once, he says, no real man likes to eat out of a pot in which he doesn't contribute, Mr. President. I hope you remember someone telling me that. And we have a lot of men now who do not contribute to the pot that they eat out of as a result of this government restructuring program and the debt thing that we're having. Sir, so that is one aspect of the program that government seems to be patting itself on the back, but they're missing. I don't want to boast, and I don't want to invite more people, but I will tell you, there are some people who frequent my office to get assistance, send their children to school, to get food. Sometimes I'll tell you, sir, that some of these people who went home under this program, this restructuring program, the only real meal the children get is when they go to school and get lunch. This is happening in Barbados today, you know. We are patting, the government is patting itself on the back. We have accomplished a lot of things, but they are leaving the people who need them most to struggle and to suffer. Mind you, the meals that they get at school meals used to be good one time, but not good anymore. So they don't even get a good meal now sometimes. You're fixing it, you tell me? Because I can tell you now, they're getting hot dogs and all kind of foolishness now. Want is to get a solid meal, and that is happening through the next thing. I am glad that you are aware of it, but I want you to fix it. I don't just want you to be aware, I want you to fix it. Because some people, believe it or not, rely on these school meals to help them through the next day and the next day. Vacations, one time when I was a little boy, we go on vacation, we used to be happy, we used to fly kite, we used to go in the gully and catch crayfish and all kinds of things. Now, when you get vacation, you're not getting any school meals and you're suffering. This is what the government of Barbados has reduced the people who are most vulnerable. That is what they have reduced them to. Waiting for school meals. So vacation coming, some people ain't gonna eat. So don't pat yourselves on the back. This restructuring program might look good at the surface, but look underlying, and it is not so good. You know? Senator Gwyneth spoke about the banks and taking advantage of people, unfairing them. But then only the banks here, Senator Gwyneth, it's the credit unions too. I know of one instance where a young lady who got unfairly dismissed. I know she was unfairly dismissed because we have actually established that at the Labor Department. But the bank wants her house. You know, they set the things in place to get the house. They get the court and they sell the house and all kind of stuff. But trust me, sir, no, they get back a job. But the bank is so avaricious, you know. Even though they get back a job and she can start back paying, you have to cover all the arrears. Or we can still sell the house. To get back a job, you know. These predator banks in Barbados. And don't support me in this because it is the Barbados Labour Party that get rid of the National Bank of Barbados and give it to the Trinidadians who doing it to us now too. You know? So don't support me. Think of what I'm saying. But what is worse, I'm a credit unionist too. I served at the credit unions for a number of years. As a matter of fact, I was on the supervisory committee of one credit union for about 5-6 years. They wouldn't let me get off. I ran for the supervisory committee. Is the committee that monitors the credit union, make sure the board behaves and the staff behaves. I tried to run for the board one year and I got about 15 votes. I remember my name at the supervisory committee, I got over 120. They wanted me there to make sure the fellows were behaving good. So I know about the credit unions. And one of the things that the credit unions are doing in Barbados, they are following the banks now. Credit unions are not banks. They are there for service. But we have a lot of people coming into the credit union movement who know nothing about credit unions. As a matter of fact, they come out to the banks. And they started treating everybody. Because the credit union membership you're not just customers, you're owners, you are members of the organization. But they treat you with scant respect. I'll give you an example what I'm talking about. You go to the credit union, you get a loan to buy a house. You lost your job. When I was there, we worked with you. Senator Holder will tell you about that. She's a credit unionist too. Senator Dr. Holder. Right? She's a credit unionist too, of some repute. So she knows of what I'm speaking about. She knows about the people who are not steeped in the credit union philosophy, who come into the credit unions not for service, but to see what they can get. And at the same time, they disadvantage the people who they should be helping. The example that I'm going to give you. If you do not pay your credit union loan, you can file what they call a dispute under Section 171 of the Cooperative Societies Act. That will go before the Financial Services Commission. If you look at the legislation, it will say registrar. But when they change the legislation, they tell you, well, registrar means now Financial Services Commission. You can file a dispute and you will get a judgment from the commission. In the old days, the registrar used to give you a judgment. Very, very, very quickly, very easily. Because the facts are not in dispute. You borrow money, yes. You owe it, yes. You can pay, no. Well, we're going to give a decision against you. And that decision was registered in the High Court as a judgment of the High Court. The new legislation tweaked it a little, and it says, well, then you will have to turn around and file to have it registered. Same difference. But what happens? The credit unions are not now taking the members to the Financial Service Commission, filing the dispute with them, because it will cost the member $25 when you have to pay the credit union's costs. It will cost that member $25 if you file a dispute with the Financial Services Commission. That's Section 171, I think, 7 or so. A dispute of a debt. Money owed to the credit is also a dispute within the meaning of that section. So you can file a dispute and get the same decision that you would have gotten had you gone to the court. The difference is you go to the court and you file a case against that member, and you see them in the paper all the time. Every day. I saw some yesterday. You file a case against that member. You have to hire a lawyer to do so. And the lawyer now has to get his fees. But the fees come from the member who you have just taken to court. And the fees are usually 15% of what you owe. I just did a quick calculation here. And if you owe $250,000 to the credit union, you have to pay $37,500 in fees for the credit union's lawyer, because you have to pay for the collection costs for the credit union. And it's $37,500 on top of the $250,000. You cannot pay $250,000, but they're not asking you to pay the $250,000 plus $37,500. As opposed to going to the Financial Service Commission under Section 171 of the Act and paying $25. That's what it will cost you, $25. And all good people that we call brothers in the credit union are doing that to their brothers and sisters in the credit union because they want to enrich a few lawyers who make a living out of filing cases against credit union members in the courts. Trust me, they've got some lawyers in Barbados, that's all they do. No, Kevin didn't want them. I know them. So imagine you can pay $37,500 in fees, or you can pay $25 in fees. But the credit union ought to go to court and make its member pay $37,000 on $250,000, 15%. So that's what they're charging. No, but they're charging $15,000 an hour. Trust me. this is also contributing to the hardship that the government has imposed on the people of Barbados. You're talking about it's going to be hard and everybody can feel the pain and thing. People feeling more pain than others. And the pain that you are feeling, the people who are feeling the most pain are the people at the bottom. You know what it is to be working at a job public service and you struggle with the pittance that they pay you in the public service and you manage to get a little house. You feel good. And then they send you home. And you wave that house goodbye. You kiss it, goodbye, your house gone. Because some predator credit union or some predator bank. I am not advocating getting rid of credit unions. I'm advocating getting rid of the people who run them. The people, and get back to the people who used to care about the membership. Senator Holder is agreeing with me. Senator Dr. Holder is agreeing with me. Because she knows. She knows that we have people who come into the credit union movement who knows nothing about it, who don't know that the credit union is supposed to be taking care of its brothers and sisters. But they come in and they'll look at numbers and they'll do all this fancy things that you do at university and stuff and crunch your numbers. I remember we had a lady at the Credit Union, Public Workers Credit Union called Olive Trotman. She used to be on the credit committee. She stayed there for about nearly 20 years. It's an elected position. So every year she would be elected. You know why? She cared. She cared. People don't care anymore now. What they do, they turn up with a busload of people who don't know anything about the credit unions. And it started with a fellow who used to lead the opposition and then joined the other party. He started the busload of people coming in because the first meeting he ever came and ran, he met Moscow. He topped the polls. Never ever attended a meeting before. Nothing about the credit unions. But they came in because it was a mass-based thing that had money in it. You know, so that is what we're having. So we have people who lost their jobs, now losing their home, losing their minds, losing their spouses, because, you know, two hungry people in the house, somebody got to do something, so somebody's left. Yeah, that's what's happening. You can't live without food either. All right? Now, till death do us part means if you don't leave, you might die. It would part at death. So we are looking at this program as though we were successful. You are successful when you take care of those who cannot take care of themselves. You sent home people who can't take care of themselves. And worse than that, you send them home, and many of them did not get their benefits. They didn't get what we would call, in some was the equivalent to servant's pay. So some of them are still waiting for their termination benefits, you know. So when you're saying government paying its debt, no, you're not paying all, and you're not paying the ones that matter most. You have people who got sent home and are suffering, and you can't get a sent to some government departments because some departments and some statutory boards, because you government now under this program they can't carry more debt, but the debt that you're carrying is money owed to poor people who can ill afford to hold on. So don't pat yourselves on the back. Mind you, trust me when I tell you, I would be happy if this government does extremely well. Oh, no, I'll be very happy. But you're not doing well. You're doing well for the people who you care about. The people who canvass for you. The people you're giving contracts to. Not the people that you should be taking care of, you know. You must remember that this government is a Barbados Labour Party government. They call it Labour for a reason. You know? If you were supposed to be taking care of the laboring classes. Now you're taking advantage of the laboring classes. In preference, look, don't get me vexed. I was a member and a very proud member of the Barbados Labour Party. But when I saw what you were doing, I had to leave because you were not doing what your philosophy says. I left, stopped paying dues. I left when you came.
On a point of order, Mr. President, Senator Franklin is misleading this chamber. When I joined the Barbados Labour Party, Senator Franklin was an assistant secretary. And he trained me as an assistant secretary of the Barbados Labour Party. He must not mislead this chamber.
But then I had to leave. I tell you, when you came, I left. I couldn't make a hand of you. I couldn't make a hand of him. You know? You walk into that. You know, the membership, this is Barbados Labour Party, grew out of the laboring classes. You know, if you walk down St. Michael's Road any night and you hear boom, 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 that is Tom and Grant League rolling in their graves. You know, because of what you were doing to the poor people, because they cared about poor people. You know, you are talking about these 10 lost years, and you are telling me you took the last decade. It wasn't 10 lost years, it's 15 lost years. You want to know why it was 15? The Dems wouldn't have gotten in if you were doing your jobs and doing it well. So the last 5 years was misery, so the people decided, let me take a chance with them, and it was fire and pan fire. That's what happened. So it was 15 years, 15 lost years. And you come back now and want to make it 20. You know? No, you had growth. You had growth. But you're having, and you're going to have growth now. And our credit ratings are going to rise. But we have people in Barbados that cannot eat. We have people in Barbados who cannot feed their children. People who this government sent home and tell people in Barbados, oh, we are going to have this household mitigation program headed by one talk show host so that you don't criticize them up on the program. You know how you buy off people? And so you want the program not to criticize them more because I buy you off. You know? So you end up now not mitigating anything because a lot of these people can't get any help. You know, you cut the welfare. You send home people and cut welfare. Yeah, cut. People at welfare don't have any money to give anybody. I know I send people. I send people to welfare who can't get anything. You know? And you got even one MP who objected to some person getting some assistance from the welfare department because that boy didn't vote for me. I ain't calling him here now. But I saw him and in the paper pretending to be caring about people. This week. So don't pat yourselves on the back. You have been taking care of the people that matter to you. The people who are your friends and family, and I call them party hats or whatever else you feel like calling them, but you still have people out there suffering, people who need help, and you're not helping them. But you're saying, oh, what a good thing, because I stay the course. I stay the course of what? Course to hell. That is what you are doing, and you're not looking to see the guy who ain't got a voice. Those people have a voice once in 5 years. And they jump up and wear red shirts and things, and then you know they're gonna keep on wearing red shirts, they're gonna got nothing more. You know? Take care of these people Don't tell me how good the program is doing. It is not doing good enough when people out there at the bottom are suffering. And another thing that you have done, in an effort, you know, the government was supposed to cut the salaries and pensions. It is going to be virtually impossible to cut pensions unless you kill a few people. So you said about killing people by cutting their pensions. And you're telling me...
Yes, but, Mr. President, on a point of order. On a point of order. I know that we are accustomed to the animation of the member, and maybe even theatrics, but may I caution at this point, Mr. President, that we have some young minds in the chamber, and I'm sure they are taking copious notes of our proceedings. And I would caution the goodly leader of opposition business to please return to the subject at hand. Return to items 7 and 8 on the order paper. Mr. President. Thank you.
Sir, I know you're not ruling on that because it's not a point of order, so I'll continue.
I was concerned about the language. Government talking about killing people.
But that's what they're doing, sir. People are dying as a result of this program that the government has put in place. Right now, sir, I have people who have come to see me to get help with their pensions. Government cut pensions, and this isn't only you. As you have a problem, when I say you, meaning the government of Barbados, B or D, they attack the poorest of the poor. In 2014, when the government sent home people, and that was not in, the sending home the people was not enough to help them balance the budget, they too cut pensions, illegally so. This administration came and did the same thing. Mind you, after a few little protests, government reversed itself and started and gave back some of the people, and I stress the some. But let me tell you something. Public servants who came into the public service after the 1st of September 1975 will have their pensions that they receive from the Treasury reduced by the amount of money they get as a national insurance old age contributory pension. Somehow, that last administration and this one misinterpreted old age contributory pension to mean invalidity benefits. So people who are on invalidity benefits had their benefits wiped out, their pensions wiped out by that amount, and you are having people say, oh, this is what the legislation said. This is not what the legislation have said. It says it will reduce by the national insurance pension. But that is further explained in the general orders for the public service. And the general orders for the public service now is now a schedule to the Public Service Act since 2007. And at General Order 8.4, it says it is reduced by the National Insurance Old Age Contributory Pension. These people that you have removed the pensions from, General Order 8.4, write it down. So these people who have their pensions reduced before they reach the national insurance age, because the national insurance old age contributory pension starts at 67 according to the National Insurance and Social Security Act 1966. So, we have people who are 45 and 50 and 61 who the government is saying, according to the legislation, that they're 67. And they're removing their pensions illegally, and some of those same people had mortgages. National insurance is exactly that, an insurance. So if you pay national insurance, when you become ill, insurance cover you. But instead, the government, both administrations, not just you, both administrations sought to balance the books on the backs of the people who can least afford it. Every day, I am getting people calling me, telling me, my pension cut, my pension cut, my pension cut. You imagine you are getting, yes, it has a lot to do with that, because these people, you have balanced the books. You're trying to balance the books on the back of the people who are getting these pensions. That's what you've done. So it is very relevant. So what I'm talking about, I'm not campaigning, ma'am, but I'll tell you, when you campaign for Ronald, see,
Mr. President, I know that we have given Senator Franklin a lot of latitude so far, but methinks he does go too far on this occasion, as he does each time. Mr. President, I beg you, constrain him.
You're running for policy? So when you are canvassing, you're going to have to butt up on those same people that you treat badly now, Remember them. And they say Barbadians have short memories, political memories. But sometimes when you have a little child crying for breakfast and you can't give him anything, that can be searing into your mind. This program, this restructuring program, it looks good on the surface. But under the surface, the poor man is suffering. The poor woman is suffering. And as a result, their children are suffering. We don't get the, the Barbados scholars don't come from those trips to your way. They're hungry. Not that they break. They're hungry. And they're hungry because government has done it to them. So, I am not opposing what the government is doing. All I am, in terms of renegotiating the debt, all I am saying to you is to have a little heart and make sure when you are restructuring that you take care of those who can't take care of themselves. That is what government is about.
Mr. President, I rise on a point of order. I really did not want to. I really did not want to affect the contribution of Senator Franklin, but I think he is misleading this House. He is suggesting that the government is putting in place policies to hurt poor people. He is suggesting that the government is not seeking to take measures that would empower Barbadians. During my presentation, Mr. President, I took the opportunity to identify why it is that we are in the position we are in. And I think that Senator Franklin is misleading the House.
Must not be used as an opportunity for speech.
Mr. President, I think Senator Grant misunderstood me. He said I am suggesting these things. I'm not suggesting them, sir. I'm saying that this is what you have done. And no suggestion. I'm guessing. I know actual people who you have impoverished. I know people who have lost their homes because of what you are doing and what you are supporting. Trust me when I tell you, I want the government to do well. Because if the government don't do well, more and more of the people of Barbados are going to go through the things I'm talking about. So I want you to do well. But at the same time, I want you to realize that there are casualties of your program, this restructuring that you have done, what I would have done, I'm asked what I would have done. What I would have done is to collect the over $1 billion in VAT that was outstanding rather than writing it off. How? By selling some of the properties in Bridgetown, the people who owe them, go in the court registry, go in the Supreme Court registry and look in the VAT judgment book, and you will see prominent people in Barbados who own properties, who you still see on TV talking, and you write off that for them, you know. But you don't write off that for the people who can least afford it. Go and look at the Inland Revenue Judgment Book that you see use one time, we're still using it, and you will see the amount of people. Look at the National Insurance Judgment Register, and you will see. So rather than write off the PAYE that people pay from 1968 to 2000, or the VAT from 1997 to 2000, you should seek to collect it. And don't decide that it is not recoverable because you're in trade. That's what I would have done first. It would have taken a little more time, but we got time. Right now the people suffering, they're suffering more. Don't take the program was short. It's supposed to be short, a short snap. I think, but when you did that, you did it without regard for the people who you should be protecting. You know, you think those millionaires want a government to protect them? It is the poor. And it's the poor that you have hurt more so than anybody else. You know? The last group was bad. No, let's face it. They were awful. But you have joined them and continued the slide. No, you have actually joined them and continued the slide. Just that you are doing it with more finesse. Make it look better, you know? But people still going home. People still suffering. Look, let me show you something. You complain about doing business in Barbados, how it takes so long, whatever else you're doing, right? And that's one of the reasons why we are suffering all kind of stuff. Corporate affairs and intellectual property have 50 staff. And they were saying to the government, we don't have enough staff to do the work. So these are the people that register the companies in Barbados. So to get the investment coming in. And what this government did, rather than give them the staff, government joined this restructuring program because you had to send home numbers, send home 8 or 9 of those people. So you didn't have enough people to do the work, but you sent home some. So the work can't get done. And then you're going to blame the civil servants for not being able to do the work. When people are doubling down and doing 2 and 3 people work, the people go home, and the civil servants that remaining trying to get it done. So you shot yourself in the foot. Sir, I thank you very much. I realize you pointed to your watch, and I only planned to be for 10 minutes. I don't know how the time ran away. But I'm not very good at keeping time. But what I will do, sir, I will get back to this at another time. But I want this government to realize that the public relations that they're putting out there, making themselves sound good, they got people that are hurting. It sounds good, you know, you got all this PR out there and you telling the people, you know, but we got casualties. I'm talking in terms of casualties because Senator Haynes knows about casualties. She's a daughter. You know, and I'm talking about casualties hurt. I'm talking about casualties dead. This program is responsible for a lot of pain, unnecessary pain to the people of this country. Step back. Look at the damage you're doing. Undo some of it. I know you're not going to be able to undo all. But the one they want most to undo is to those pensioners who you take away their pensions from, and the ones that them took away the pensions from too. Because they are still entitled to their pensions until they reach age 67. Read the general orders. General Order 8.4. It says old age contributory pension. It doesn't say invalidity benefits. You see, the problem with you is that you have civil servants who spy for you by the people in power. Then you make them, you appoint them, make them big boys, and then they know what they're doing, you know. And they hurt, and they give foolish advice. But when you bring idiots to get jobs, you gotta take the advice to get them. They're wrong. Sir, I am much obliged to you, and I'm sorry if I went over the 10 minutes I had planned.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I rise in support of the the bill and the bill before us. And following on from Senator Franklin's presentation, I could tell, you know, even though he might have said it without much finesse, you know, there's a level of empathy, I believe, that he has towards the people who have suffered as a result of the debt restructuring. And that's something that I think everybody in this room can agree with. You know, anybody being sent home is a very, very difficult thing. But it was a sidebar question Senator Grant had asked. What would Senator Franklin have done if we were in a parallel universe where the economic fortunes of the country were in his hands? Truly, what would he have done? He suggested collecting debt that was outstanding for 20 years. But if Senator Franklin had come to office at the time when we did, when we had the Credit Suisse loan being due, $100 million due, a week or two after taking office, and another $100 million due December with $400 million in foreign reserves, what would Senator Franklin have done? How would he have managed to collect, what did he say, $1 billion in outstanding VAT that was not paid in 20 years? How would you collect that in 6 months? I really wonder. We have to remember that we took office at a time where we were not starting from a level playing field. And an analogy that Senator Franklin made me think, a reference he made in terms of what's happening above the surface and what's happening below the surface made me think of the ocean. And as he sits beside his very astute colleague, Senator Drakes, I decided to make my analogy based on the Marianas Trench. The Marianas Trench is the deepest oceanic trench. It is deeper than Mount Everest is tall. We were starting from the Marianas Trench of economic positions. We were handed the innings from a government that was not paying NAS. To, I think they said something like 83,000 households were impacted by unpaid income tax refunds. 83,000 households. You had small business people who were not paid VAT for donkey's years. You had ballooning debt. A race to the bottom in terms of downgrades. Couldn't borrow a cent of money. What were the options that we had at the time? And what I am very, very proud of is that I can sit on a side where the team, the economic team, that sadly was mocked in here during the course of the first debate. You know, you keep referencing our economic advisors as Ernie and Bert, which I think is grossly disrespectful, because they do deserve credit for helping to craft a program that has actually gotten Barbados back on to stable footing. Prime Minister repeatedly says, we cannot expect growth before stabilization. And if we're starting from the bottom of the Marianas Trench, we could be recovering while not being yet at the surface. And I hope that analogy is something that people can understand, because we are starting to see improvements. People are getting, those 83,000 householders who were impacted by not getting income tax refunds, some as far back as 2011, they're getting them back. The small business owners, they're getting their VAT refunds back. And these are some of the things that we have been working on. The first thing that we came into this house to do, I believe, other than amending the Constitution, was to see that the non-contributory pensioners were able to get an increase in their pensions. So I kept hearing this talk about pensions being affected, and what about the pensioners? Contributory pensioners would have gotten their wage increase along with the salary increase that we all voted for back in 2018 as well. One of the other things that I'm very, very proud of as well is that the government sought to resolve the issue related to CLECO. Over 8,900 people. Those were poor pensioners as well. So the repeated claim that we're not looking after the vulnerable, we're not looking after the poor, we're giving people back their tax refunds. We settled CLECO, 8,900 people got money back, Res Life can close down because that matter is resolved. The small businesses who didn't get VAT refunds back have a little capital back. One of the other things that we sought to do in this House a few months ago was to adjust the income tax bands downward so that every single Barbadian has more money in their pocket to take home. Once again, in January, the next phase of reductions in the income tax bands will kick in. This government that is apparently assaulting the poor, according to Senator Franklin, doubled the reverse tax credit for the poorest of the poor. And one of the other points I wanted to make, sir, the savings, well, it just sounds like numbers to some people, but the numbers matter. The $1.2 billion that we are saving on a recurring basis annually, Barbados dollars, 1.2 billion Barbados dollars, combined savings from the debt, domestic and foreign debt. Do you know what our central government wage bill is? $800 million. That means to save the money that we are saving through having restructured that debt, we would have had to send home every single public servant and then some. Do you know how many people got sent home total throughout the course of this program? And I agree, one person being sent home is too much because there are real people on the end of it. There are real households that are feeling the pain, as you alluded to. But 1,100 people got sent home. Compare that to 2014 when 3,500 people got sent home. Compare that to the early 1990s. Compare that to the early 1990s when 4,500 people got sent home and everybody else who kept the jobs took an 8% wage cut. Back in the 70s, people were working 3-day work weeks. And none of those governments were facing the challenges that this government faced. So I just saw it was important to add some balance in terms of the social side of it, because to suggest that we don't care about poor people is not fair, you know? What I wanted to address as well earlier, Senator Drake in her presentation was making reference to the interest payments. And to her credit, I really must, because I respect her as a professional and just as a human being. We were making reference to the grace period as it pertains to the foreign debt, and the grace period only extends to amortization and not to interest. So to her credit, she was correct in speaking to the interest payment. I like her. I had a lot more to say, but truly a lot of it has already been said. I just felt like it was important to speak to some of these social things and other investments in terms of the people we're hearing about investments in education. One of the first things that happened was that the Minister of Education made a ministerial statement to allow Barbadian young people to once again be able to access university education. That is really one of the greatest investments in our national development, investing in young people.
You want it all.
But further to that, we're also hearing about the Princess Trust and the Youth Advanced Corps, which is seeing 5 times the enrollment of the previous program.
Barbados Youth Service.
The Barbados Youth Service, 5 times the enrollment. And there are efforts being made on the social side, and I just wanted to kind of temper the argument a bit in our defense. Because to say that we don't care about people, could you imagine a Barbados that had a devalued dollar? It wouldn't just be 1,100 people suffering. We all would be, guaranteed. So as the Prime Minister said, as the Prime Minister rightly said, the burden needed to be shared, spread across capital, across labor, the foreign investors hold some, the visitors are holding some. And that's the direction that we, on the government side, have chosen to take, and it's a decision that clearly is working. So we thank you in advance for your support this afternoon. And I'm obliged, Mr. Deputy President.
I recognize Senator Boyce.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy President. And I rise, sir. I'll try to contain the sanctimonious tone this time, but it tends to erupt, especially when we perhaps need to remember where we are and what we're doing. And the discussions that we have are extremely important, sir. And while there's opportunity and time for what persons may call, what we would call mirth and what those who are watching us today may call gaff, it's a very serious topic. And perhaps if I could bring together all the different threads that were discussed today from an extremely independent position, sir, we can see that this is something which we have to support. And at the end of the day, any balanced perspective recognizes that the government should be congratulated for achieving its objective. Now, when I say the government should be congratulated, also the government should be cautioned, because within this very chamber, you're beginning to hear the echoes, Mr. Deputy President, of a rhetoric that's leaning, it's not there yet, but it's leaning towards a sense of strong self-reliance. Now, that's to be commended, but I believe a criticism of the former administration was that they did not listen. And we should all be reminded, so as not to repeat the mistakes of the past, that we are guided by any such mistakes if they were so made. Also, it pains me to see my comrades on both sides, opposition and government, trading such harsh barbs. It really does. We, I think, have to set a standard, Mr. Deputy President. This is the house that we sit in. And while certain things may be allowed and even encouraged in the other place, this is not the place for it. We are put here for a purpose, to have a certain type of discussion, and I would like to encourage both sides to hold the mantle a little higher as we seek to get forward with the people's business, sir. Now, Mr. Deputy President, sir, I have noted the confidence of the government's perspective, and I think it is a confidence which is deserved based on the fact that if something was stated to be done and you have achieved it, you're allowed to crow about it, for want of a better word, sir. I have noticed also the perspective, very detailed and well laid out by Senator Drakes with regard to what the figures indicate. I, for my part, was not aware that there was growth prior to 2018. But I guess from sitting in here, sir, you would be unaware of anything positive prior to 2018, sir. May 2018, sir. I am also unaware that we are in a recession. I believe that that is an economic definition, and I would like to hear from a different source, perhaps a response to that. I have noted Senator Franklin's impassioned pleas, and while they're given the necessary coloring, I think at the end of the day, they could be distilled into saying, let's take care of the poor people through all the discussion. And Mr. Deputy President, I did listen to you with some interest, and it seems to be a very popular topic by both the opposition and the government senators with regard to reference to the banks. And actually the term bandied about here was predatory. Not by you, Mr. Deputy President. But sir, you gave reference to the fact that when you look at the court list, there are a number of matters which reflect the fact that the banks are forced to recover monies lent through the court system. I thought I would just spend a little time speaking as to why that is. Sir, we in Barbados have implemented a very strong legislative protective framework for someone who borrows money from the bank and secures it against their family property. One of the arguments is that you're not allowed to take certain steps to enforce unless you get an order from the court. And this is something which is specially codified within the Barbados Property Act. However, that argument is currently being reviewed, and the test seems to be one which the courts will have to interpret. But the main point is that in Barbados, unlike other jurisdictions, we can certainly say that there is a convention of seeking the court's aid in recovering monies owed to the bank. Now, while that may lead to long lines at court, the practice, and I will lean to the side which says that it is practice and not law, sir, the practice of utilizing the courts for this basis, I think, is a good form of civic compromise, because the alternative is that the enforcement is done by means of self-help, and that leads to a variety of horrors. So let us allow the courts to work, and certainly with the enhanced support that's being provided, these things should be moving sooner rather than later. And also, there's another perspective that we should not forget. Our colleague, Senator Dr. Lynette Holder, having completed her doctorate in theology, will remind you, Mr. Deputy President, that the Bible is replete of the obligation of a borrower. And at the end of the day, even the good Lord spoke about the fact that you should try to settle these debts before you find yourself in prison. But what I mean to say is that, yes, we should be cognizant of those who suffer because of having taken loans they can't repay. But at the same time, we need to recognize that if the banks don't get the loans repaid, they can't lend the money to help other persons. So we need to have a balanced perspective. Also, Mr. Deputy President, I am glad to see the concept of equity and fairness and mercy being so strongly championed in this Senate. It was a year ago when the conversation about mercy wasn't so palatable. And it's good to see that when the circumstances make it, but it's how we do it. And it's good to see, Mr. Deputy President, that as we evolve, we recognize that justice and rights must always be tempered, sir, with some mercy. But let me get back, Mr. Deputy President. Thank you for allowing me the leeway. Back to the topic at hand, and it's with some great trepidation, sir, that I venture into this area of figures. I don't know, Mr. Deputy President, if you, like me, as a practitioner of the courts, we have a certain fear of figures. Is that a fair statement to make, sir?
It's for me.
But you also taught, sir, so you may not.
No, I'm master.
Okay, so I am extremely cautious. So what I did when I began this attempt at analysis was I went for some notes of the clerk's table, sir. The two articles I want to refer this honorable House to, sir, are firstly an article published by Mr. Ian Durant. I hear the economists in the chamber saying yes, titled Recent Restructuring, and I can't get the exact missive, but it's a recent restructuring of sovereign commercial debt in the CARICOM region, some outcomes and lessons. I don't have the year when it was published, sir, but the abstract seems to indicate that it was somewhat recent. Secondly, sir, references will be made to the IMF working paper, number 17 of 171, in relation to the Caribbean territory, sir. And this was a working paper which spoke to sovereign debt restructurings in Grenada, causes, processes, outcomes, and lessons learned. The reason being, sir, there's a pretty detailed table of debt restructuring throughout the Caribbean included therein. And then finally, sir, in relation to Barbados itself, IMF working paper 17 of 171, which speaks to our beloved island as its case study. Now, Mr. Deputy President, an analysis of the documentation reveals that, and please take this with the largest possible amount of salt that you can your daily intake will allow, but my calculations, let me be very clear, my poor calculations, sir, would seem to suggest that the period which we were engaged in the restructuring of the external debt of 15 months is not an outlier with regard to the other Caribbean negotiations. Dominica, it seems, took 11 months. Grenada took 13 months, and in one case, 32 months. St. Kitts took 10 months, and Antigua, well, they went all the way to 34 months. So, sir, the first thing I would like to comment is reviewing the data provided. The government has been able to achieve through its advisors, the labeled White Oak, a negotiation within a reasonable time, sir. That's from the data. What also must be noted, sir, and of course there will be different factors, was that in analyzing the external debt negotiation write-down, and I believe, sir, the term is nominal to PV loss. That's correct. Nominal to PV loss, which I believe is an economics term which refers to reduction in the debt or the value of the debt or the debt write-down, for want of a local expression. Now, sir, we heard today in this chamber that the external debt will be reduced by, am I correct, 26.3? That's the figure, sir. Now, recognizing that every 26.3%, thank you. Recognizing that every territory is different, and perhaps our negotiations were led, very well led on the other side, or Barbados' debt is considered a bit more precious. For whatever reason, sir, Dominica was able to obtain a reduction of theirs in their negotiation with their external creditors of 54%. Grenada was able to obtain a reduction of 33 in one instance and 50% in another. And St. Kitts was able to obtain a 68.4%, while Antigua went the full hog and and received 100% write-off. I don't know how that was possible, but that's what he did. That's Antigua.
Sorry,
Things
Mr.
tend to
Deputy
operate differently
President.
there.
I'm sorry, on a point of elucidation, the principal was reduced by 26.3%, and there was a 35% reduction in the interest. So the combined is about a 50% reduction in our debt.
50?
Yeah, of our debt stock.
Okay. Thank you for the information, Senator Dr. Haynes. And that goes to the point that if it is, that is a 50% reduction, that would then put Barbados in the middle of the Caribbean territories. So again, this is something which we need to consider, and this is with the hindsight being 2020 of whether or not the objective achieved was one which did us the best in these circumstances. For my part, I think that the government is well poised to move forward, and that analysis, with the benefit of what we have now, would perhaps go on to make an assessment as to what we do. Heaven forbid we find ourselves in a similar situation going forward. But what is interesting, sir, and if we take the figure of 26.3 for principal and the other figure for interest, and whatever figure we land in, when we compare apples with apples, sir, we find that in a scenario, because we are debating the domestic debt as well, sir. What we find in the scenario, sir, is that the hit that was taken in the domestic debt was more than that which was taken by the external creditors. And I believe the rationale for this was set out by Senator Cummings, who spoke to the fact that we are the ones who have to essentially deal with our responsibility. So when we see that the hit on the central bank was 55%, the hit on the NIS was 75.7%, I think we should also be mindful that this is just not a hit on a piece of paper, but this impacts the ability for these organizations to do certain funding. Certainly the NIS in relation to what it does for sick and for pensions, etc., etc. However, the private sector, which is made up of the banks, the trusts, the credit unions, the insurance, and the pensions fund, the average of that as set out by the IMF is 29.1. So if we take the 29.1 and compare it with the 26.3 / the 35 and the overall 50, we may find that the private sector has been impacted in an equitable manner like that of the external creditors. The concern being raised, and I'm sure the Senator McConney would address it, was the impact on the public sector, that volume. We recognize it was necessary, but of course, how do we build ourselves back up from there? Long story short, sir, it seems as though, and this is with the benefit of the hindsight, and I've listened about the billions that have been saved, depending on who you listen to, sir, whatever, at the end of the day, it's billions, and we certainly hope so. There has been savings achieved. There has been savings achieved, and now the government has the wiggle room to move forward. And we would want, well, certainly for my part, and when I say we, I mean those, all of us in here, to wish the government the best in its endeavors and every success moving forward with the gains that have been achieved through the debt restructuring. I also wish to publicly state that I recall the government did make certain promises in relation to the pensioners who were impacted by the domestic debt restructuring, and those promises have been kept. What remains to be seen now, Mr. Deputy President, is what is done with this, breathing space that has been negotiated. Sir, the country has held strain, and the data is clear. The IMF table, sir, is very clear, and that, just let me refer it again for those who want to read it. The IMF country report, number 19 of 182, is explicit with what the country has had to endure. The fact is, the domestic debt restructuring has been felt by us all. Senator Franklin may say not by him, but by the majority of us in Barbados, we would say that we have felt it, sir.
Great thinking people.
All, sir.
Great thinking.
And it's hoped that the growth programs identified, I've heard Senator Haynes speak about it, that the growth programs identified are pushed and that the economy is ramped. Now, when we hear talk of investor confidence, it's a hard metric to measure. I don't even know if it's a measurable metric, and I believe that Senator Nurse would have spoken about this factor. You have the pitch. Now let's move forward. Growth programs and funding to areas which are in need. Our beloved Senator Grant comes in here and makes his plea, and we are all very cognizant. The funding with regard necessary to assist with regard to the garbage collection, we hope is prioritized. The funding with regard to the access and the arrears for the health care, which we'll be debating soon, it would need to be prioritized, and hopefully this can now be found. For my part, Mr. Deputy President, if wishes were ever horses, I would want a national library edifice, a home for the youth where, as we have seen recently, sir, we do need to treasure them and keep them close, and something which you would hear me say this time and time again, we have to build our own temples. And something where we can gather the young people in this island and show them the vision we have of Barbados going forward. But sir, this is a topic for another time. And perhaps one day these wishes will be horses. But in conclusion, I think we should congratulate the government. And now let's move forward as a nation. Thank you, sir.
Senator McConney. He's coming back. He's coming back. Just getting ready in case I have to go to committee. That. Coming?
Yeah, we know.
No, she will wrap up, and then she will wrap up, and then you push me into committee.
Yeah, yeah.
Mr. President, this has been quite an exciting debate. I have heard many things. Some have made me wonder and some made me wail. Senator Drakes spoke, and I must say, I thank her very much for the point she made that everything comes with a price, and that we could not reduce debt without sacrifice. And I want to remind this honorable House that the Barbados Labour Party administration that is here, we are paying the bill, but we did not set the price. And in fact, it is a high price. And a high price was exacted from the people of Barbados by the neglect, the mismanagement, and the practices that many right-minded people may very well call corrupt. And so the price that we have to pay, let us not punish this Barbados Labour Party government for seeking to pay the bill for price we didn't set. Senator Greenidge spoke about the fact that there is a culture of debt that is being propped up by creditors altogether. And so this conversation about debt is not just about Barbados, but it's a whole culture of debt that we have to address. Mr. Grant, Senator Grant, in reflecting on things, he reminded us that this restructuring is not just about restructuring debt, but we had to restructure an entire economy, and that all the pieces are not yet back where they ought to be, but that we are putting things back together one piece at a time. Senator Cummings reminded us that by us settling this debt, and when we say settle, we do not mean that we don't have to pay it. Settle means that we have come to agreement as to how we will move forward under conditions and terms that can work for Barbados. Senator Cummings reminded us of investor confidence and the importance of us taking responsibility to rescue ourselves and not looking for outside heroes. Senator Nurse, we thank you for your encouragement to use the resources that will now be made available. Our promises. You asked a question. You asked what was the threshold for collective action clauses in the debt restructuring agreement, the principal agreement. That is 75% before those collective action clauses will step in. And I trust that answers your question in that regard. Senator Franklin, a special man. He had, Senator Franklin, Mr. President, gave number of human interest stories. And he gave the impression that this, again, the Barbados Labour Party administration had created this situation. He has such a short memory sometimes because he seems to have forgotten the years of the work of the former administration that was not the Barbados Labour Party, that would have taken food out of people's mouths, that would have taken jobs from them, that would have taken money out of their pockets. It is not this Barbados Labour Party. You are mistaken, sir. We are trying to put food back on their tables. We are trying to put money back in their pockets. We are not, sir, seeking to do the otherwise. Senator Haynes gave us a very good reminder of what we have in fact done as a government, and I think it deserves reinforcing, because sometimes when people are in pain, they forget the distance they have come, even though they're not all the way there yet. And Mr. Senator Boyce, in his extreme independence, I have never heard such a term. He is an extreme independent senator. I want to thank you very much for the encouragement that you have given to this government to stay the course and to continue to reinforce the work that we're doing, mindful that there's so much more to do. Now, before I close this debate, I'd like to set the record straight with regards to what this Barbados Labour Party administration has done as it relates to poor people. We have increased the reverse tax to $25,000. We have increased the non-contributory pensions to $225 a week. We have introduced the compensatory income credit. The backlog of claims to which other members here referred, and these are my latest figures, which may very well be more or better, more improved because of the last time. NIS backlog of claims is finally being cleared. Up to my last figures, we had settled 11,027 claims, or 41% of the outstanding claims. 12.7 million was paid to 453 claimants. And these claims related to contributory pensions, non-contributory pensions, invalidity, sickness, disability, the list goes on. So if we want to stand in this honorable house and mislead the people of Barbados, it will not be people on this side of the table that shall do it. And we would simply ask that, Mr. President, that as people stand here and make claims about what has and has not been done to the people of Barbados, that we will seek to do so with a different level of integrity. As Senator Boyce said, we need to raise the standard in here. And so, Mr. President, as we conclude, for those who might seek, I think we have a lot to celebrate as a country. We have not gone the full distance, but we really and truly have to take note of the distance we've come and be grateful to God and to all those who have worked to bring us here. And I would say, for those who would feel to trivialize the progress that we have made, ask yourself, where would we be as a country if this Barbados Labour Party administration had not made the tough decisions that it had made? Had we not stepped in and engaged the world-class expertise that we did to help us settle this debt? Where would we be if this administration had not moved with urgency to deal with the debt crisis so we can create a better life for these people? Mr. President, it is with these few words that I beg that this be read again a second time.
The question is that item 7, the debt holder approval of debt restructuring and validation bill 2019, be read a second time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. Move that I go into the committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for the further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair. The Senate resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate for the further consideration in detail of the item under consideration. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. And we are now in committee. Over to you, Captain.
Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move. Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 1 stand part.
The question is that clause 1 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Who thinks the ayes have it?
Clause 2.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
The question is that clause 2 stand part. All honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
The question is that clause 3 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you now report to His Honor the President the passing of 1 bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of 1 bill in committee. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methink the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passage of the bill under consideration in committee.
Third time.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a 3rd time.
The question is that the bill under consideration be now read a 3rd time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methink the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Debt Holder Approval of Debt Restructuring Validation Bill Act 2019.
Question is that the bill under consideration do now pass and be so cited. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The bill is now being passed and will become the Debt Holder Approval of Debt Restructuring Validation Act 2019.
Order number 8, sir. In the name of the Honorable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve under Section 3.1 of the External Loan Act, Chapter 94D, A, the borrowing in the form of the issuance of 2 new series of securities of the sums of up to $580 million in the currency of the United States of America, with the Bank of New York Mellon Corporation as trustee, for the purpose of supporting the principal agreement reached to restructure the government's external commercial debt, and B, the establishment of a sinking fund for the redemption of each issue of securities made under the said act, and for the monies necessary to maintain and service that fund.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution now pass.
The question is that the resolution, item number 8 on the order paper, which was discussed simultaneously with item number 7, that the resolution be now passed. I think he's signaling you. I think he's saying something to us.
Which one? Which one are you doing?
Order number 3, sir. In the name.
Is it?
Sir, what? He didn't put the question?
I think there was some gap though. Was there not a gap?
He didn't put.
Compliance?
What was there not a gap because she didn't say anything in the end?
All happens in resolution.
There's still an item A resolution to approve under section 3.1 of the External Loan Act, chapter 94D. I think we have now reached the point where we need to put the question. The question is that the resolution do now pass. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it, and the resolution has been passed. We now move to item number 3.
Yes, sir. In the name of the Honorable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution to approve under Section 5 of the Crown Lands Vesting and Disposal Act, Chapter 225, the vesting in the National Housing Corporation of a parcel of land, the property of the Crown, situate at Indian Ground in the parish of St. Peter in this island.
Mr. President, the resolution before the House to vest these grounds in the National Housing Corporation. Just giving a little background, Mr. President, these lands were acquired by the Crown more than 100 years ago. One parcel back in 1916, and I believe the second parcel back in 1929. And this parcel of land, the 1,876 square meters, plus the property on it, that property was formerly the Indian Ground Primary School in St. Peter. That school in St. Peter would have closed in July 1998. However, since 1996, the Indian Ground Seventh-day Adventist Church had expressed an interest in leasing this Indian Ground Primary School with an option to purchase for the conduct of church services, community-oriented activities such as a feeding center, a skills training institute, and other youth activities. This matter pertaining to the sale of land to the East Caribbean Conference of Seventh-day Adventists was discussed for the sum of $400,000, and this was submitted to Cabinet in April of this year, 2019, and it was indeed approved. It is recommended, sir, that these lands be now vested in the National Housing Corporation, with the opportunity then for the sale to be made in accordance with the Cabinet decision of April of this year. And with these remarks, sir, I beg that the resolution do not pass.
Question is that the resolution relative to item number 3 on the order paper do now pass. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. The resolution has now been passed. I think we can do CBC now. We're doing CBC now.
To say something in their interest.
I have to repeat that. Let me go, let me go, let me go. You ready there?
Order number 5, sir. In the name of Senator the Honorable Miss L.C. Moore, Minister of Information, Broadcasting, and Public Affairs, to move the second reading of the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation Amendment Bill 2019.
Mr. President, order number 5 and order number 6 are very closely interrelated, so I'd like to do these as a cognate debate.
The question is that items number 5 and 6 on the order paper, both of them relating to CBC, be now treated as a cognate debate. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and we will deal with both of them together.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Caribbean, these two matters before us here today deal with the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation and the Broadcasting Amendment Bill. Now, there is an item within the bill that speaks to both entities, which is the definition of broadcasting. And as I speak more, Mr. President, it'll become apparent why this particular part of the bill is clearly related. The Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, as most people in here would know, certainly a lot of us older, slightly older folk, has been around since 1963, when it first formed a radio station. And the radio station that was formed by the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation then would have been the first radio station that was a wireless radio station. Because at that time, they only had a wired service. Some people remember Rediffusion, or Radiofusion, depending on how you want to pronounce it, which would have been around since the mid to early 1930s. But the world was at that time moving forward because technology had changed and you were no longer using wired services. You were now moving towards wireless services, and the CBC would have been the first wireless service in Barbados at that time. It currently now has 4 radio stations, 3 FM stations and an AM station. They have 98.1, some people call it the 1. There's 100.7, which is Q100, as some people refer to it. And of course, 94.7 and the 900 AM station. The 900 AM station and 94.7 station, Mr. President, are simulcast. So what you hear on 94.7, you hear the same thing on 900 AM. And this has been so for quite some time. That station, because the fact it has the AM band that simulcasts its signal, can be heard 500 miles away from Barbados in every direction. So much so that some years ago, Mr. President, one of our Caribbean neighbors had a devastating Category 5 hurricane. And so all of their services were down. All of their sites, everything was down because a Category 5 is a devastating type hurricane. And they actually used 900 AM, which is the simulcast of 94, to get messages around the country. Because don't forget, that technology would have allowed for that to occur. It is also used, Mr. President, by many of the people in the maritime activity. So all the people in the boating business, certainly all of the fishermen, and those type of people listen to that station because when they're far away from Barbados, going about their daily work, they're able to still hear what's occurring within our shores. So 94.7 is very much still going. What we have done, what has been done with it, Mr. President, is that it has live broadcasters in the morning, and it is automated for the remainder of the day as a cost-saving measure, which is done by many other stations here in Barbados as well as worldwide. So those are the 4 stations that make up the CBC set of radio. As people would probably say, why do they have 4 stations? Well, I explained the reason for the AM station being simulcast as part of the 94.7 FM offerings. But 98.1, that station appeals to a very young audience, is 98.1, sorry, appeals to a very young audience, some of who would probably be in here, not down that end of the room, Mr. President. I don't know if they would know about 98.1, because younger people, you know, contemporary, it's contemporary radio, so contemporary people who know about contemporary matters and who know about things of that nature would know about it. So there's some in here that perhaps, based on sometimes, Mr. President, what they say may not be quite contemporary in their approach to what needs to be addressed within this country. Nevertheless, not to be distracted, Mr. President, of course, the 100.7, which people know as Q100, may appeal more to that type of demographic. I'm talking about the slightly more mature audience. And so clearly it has its own audience, and that is the reason why 100.7, which is an extremely popular station, let me add, and it even has an offshoot of it, something called Q, which is very well subscribed to when they do their activities, both here and abroad. And so that would account for the 100.7 station for those mature gray-haired type persons that may sit in this room, Mr. President. Now, the world has changed when it comes to radio, for sure. We now see radio stations not just being broadcast for the consumption of a local audience, Mr. President, but it's also broadcast all over the world. Technology allows you to do that, so you can actually listen to radio. There are many services that will take radio stations from different countries and broadcast them on the internet, basically worldwide. So even people in the diaspora can listen to all of the CBC radio stations, and for that reason, they are still popular not just here, but locally, but also abroad. And sometimes, because the world has changed and broadcasting has changed and radio has changed, we also see some programs on radio being streamed live. So sometimes you get call-in programs and people have an interest in them, so you get a chance to see them stream live. You even see the guests or the audience within the studio sitting down, and you get a chance to see what's going on and feel a part of it. And it also brings a sort of younger audience, because younger people tend to get their information using different modes than older people. So a lot of them will use that as an opportunity to sit down and watch on their phones or whatever, and what's happening on the radio stations. Then, of course, CBC also has a television station. We know it today as CBC TV 8, which would have been established in 1964. And when it was first established then, Mr. President, it was actually on Channel 3, but it's now Channel 8. You will recall, Mr. President, went from Channel 3 to Channel 9, and in 1991 it then became Channel 8, as it is today. And it is the only terrestrial station in Barbados, the only one, the only free-to-air station, the only mode of people being able to get information, for sure, visually, without having to pay for it, because it's what you hear called free-to-air. That hopefully will soon change, Mr. President, because it's certainly the government's intention to issue broadcast licenses to radio and television stations here in order to be on par and to continue to grow the industry similar to what has happened in our Caribbean, with our Caribbean brothers and sisters. You know, CBC would have been one of the first TV stations in the Caribbean, really, in 1964. That's when I'm saying it. When many other countries did not have television. And as a matter of fact, some of our neighboring countries would watch CBC TV 8, and that was the television that they had, and until they got their own stations. Needless to say, because, you know, once you have improvement in technology, then other people get their own stations, and many of our neighbors that would previously have watched CBC now have 2 and 3, and in some instances 4 stations that are available to their local population free to air. So you have a choice of 4 different entities you can watch without paying to see that. And you know, what's really funny about that, Mr. Deputy President, is that CBC TV8 in 1971 was the first English-speaking station in the West Indies to air color programming, the first. So there are a lot of things to be commended about CBC and how it has evolved and what has happened with it over the years. But unfortunately, and there's one other entity that CBC does operate, and that is MCTV, Multi-Choice Television, which is a subscription service that offers multiple channels from all over the world. Its diet includes programming from the United States, from Canada, from England, from China. And so, you know, it shows a variety of programming from movies to sports to news, all types of things. They even have programming from a Middle Eastern station that is a news station that they also carry on their subscription service. Now, having said all of that, the reason that we're here today really is in order to move with the times. And in order to move with the times, we have to look and to see what obtains worldwide with broadcasting. And for a very long time, Mr. Deputy President, most of the world would recognize that there was a convergence between broadcasting and telecommunications, where the two became interspersed. If you look at many of the media houses, even locally, they're no longer just your traditional media houses. The Nation newspaper is a newspaper. You can go and buy it, an actual newspaper you read. The Nation newspaper also has video content. We watch them all the time. They go to events, and they have their cameras, and they live stream what is happening. They do their interviews, just like if they were a television station. Now, of course, that company, I call it the Starcom network, they also have radio stations. They do podcasts, which is the ability for you to be able to listen to audio content after the fact, after it has occurred, because you may have missed it. They also do the same thing CBC does as well. They also use social media platforms and internet-based platforms in order to get out their message and their news, things like Facebook and things like Twitter, which I think we're all familiar with, because they have some countries where even their leaders, Twitter seems to have become almost like a cabinet because they tend to get a lot of their messages out via that particular mode. But certainly, and of course, many of them have their YouTube channels, which you would know is a telecoms-based type activity. Now, when you look at the CBC Act and the Broadcasting Authority Act, one of the reasons we're here with the change of the definition of broadcasting is to be able to allow CBC as an entity to be able to not just upgrade this service, but to keep them in line and in step with what is happening in the rest of the Caribbean, Mr. Deputy President. I'm not trying to compare CBC with anywhere else in the world. That would be quite unnecessary. We only need to look at what our Caribbean brothers and sisters are doing, and we would know that there has been a gap where nothing has really occurred within the information sector in Barbados within the last few years. So we're a little bit behind. We're behind in the technology that we use to get our message, and we are behind certainly in broadcasting and in the way in which we interact with people, and in the way in which we try to ensure that the entire country is privy to what is occurring within their own country by being able to get the messages out, not just to older people, but also to younger people, to everyone, whether you have money or don't have money, whether you're rich or poor, regardless. And that is a social responsibility that, Mr. Deputy President, that any government must have, and that is to ensure that their citizens are well aware of what's happening within their own country. I have always made the argument, Mr. Deputy President, we know more about what's happening in New York and what's happening in London and all over the world than what we know what's happening within our own Caribbean shores. If I dare say I'm sure that if I went outside and asked someone who is the Prime Minister of Trinidad, they might struggle, but I don't need to ask them who is the Prime Minister of England or the President of the United States. In fact, I can even tell you, Mr. Deputy President, who is running in an American election that's coming up. I probably cannot tell you who is running in the election that is occurring in one of our Caribbean islands as we speak. They probably don't even know who the candidates are or anything about it. Why? Because even though the technology is there and is available to us to use, to bring us as a Caribbean closer together and to fulfill, Mr. President, what we need to do, and that's to make this one Caribbean as much as possible to fulfill, Mr. Deputy President, some of the agreements and some of what we have said we will do as CARICOM countries, unfortunately, is not being done right now here within our own island, because we need to ensure that the entities that are able to do so, like the CBCs, who have a responsibility, like many others, and in order to ensure that your population knows what is happening within not just their own shores, but also within the Caribbean sector. Now, in order to do that, you will see that the new definition of broadcasting, we believe, does just that. And it will allow CBC then to be able to change the platform under which they now operate, Mr. Deputy President, multi-choice television. We can get away from that old light of sight service, which from my understanding, only Haiti is the country that's currently using the identical obsolete. I call it obsolete because it's more or less obsolete in many ways. Very difficult, Mr. Deputy President, just to get the equipment, and if something goes wrong with your box or your remote control or any aspect of the multi-choice service, difficult to get the parts, simply because the technology is no longer what is prevalent today. And so we can't continue to put money into obsolete technology when there's other things available that are more efficient and to use modes that will allow us to be able to reach the audience I spoke about just a few minutes ago. So part of this change will accommodate that. It would allow then the broadband type platforms and all those other platforms become part of what we consider to be broadcast in terms of their content distribution, the distribution of their content, to allow CBC then to be able to use those technologies and certainly upgrade the services and still be compliant with what their act says by making that change there. Now, besides that, one of CBC's other desires is to broaden the type of activity that they are currently engaged in terms of what they do as the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. So not just radio and television, and of course the subscription service MCTV, but other platforms, because if you go to a broadband type platform or any of those other current technologies, it allows you to offer other services by developing entire departments behind these services, an entire department behind this services, these type of, this mode, in order to be able to offer some of these services. What do I mean by this, Mr. Deputy President? I'll give you an example. I mean, I don't want to come here to discuss all of the different things CBC wants to do, but even things like being able to offer assistance or offer the ability to engage with something like a smart city is not available to them because their technology does not allow them to do that, where there are other people in Barbados that can do so. So it puts them at a disadvantage. They would also be able to offer things like, if you want to do any kind of smart metering, those platforms allow for that. So let's say you want to smart meter gas meters. It allows for that. So it allows you to be able to offer that as a service. It allows you to offer other services related to anything that could be done on that type of platform, all the way down to something as minute as medical type services to allow older people, if they're in their homes, to be able to just press a button if they get into trouble or be able to speak back to someone, simply because the platforms allow it, because there are interactive way as opposed to what they're currently using. Now, what does this mean for the corporation? It means a lot for the corporation, Mr. Deputy President. CBC was an entity that was in debt well over $100 million last year when we came to government. That debt was a debt that clearly could not be sustained, and you could not continue to just continue to accumulate debt and accumulate debt. So they have tried to restructure and are in the process of restructuring, and they already started the restructuring because unfortunately there was a retrenchment exercise where some CBC workers were retrenched. And so that then allowed them to streamline some of the processes, like automation and some other processes that they've done. But now to turn the corner and go further, you need to change some of these technologies. You need to upgrade some of the systems that they're currently using to be able to have other areas that bring in a revenue stream. Because you cannot keep depending on a revenue stream where your only revenue stream is just advertising on radio as it exists with them today and on television as it exists with them today. That is not sustainable. I don't think you need to bring any expert in business, because the first time you look at the balance sheet and you look at what is brought in from an advertising standpoint for a free-to-air television station, it becomes a problem. Now, there's a school of thought, and many people will say, well, why not just get rid of the TV station? Get rid of it. That's the easiest thing. Get rid of the TV station, don't worry about that, too expensive. But then what you then do is you then say that a country like Barbados, that was one of the first countries to have television, the first country to air color television in 1971, now has no free-to-air television station, which would make it one of the only Caribbean countries not to have that. As I said earlier, Mr. Deputy President, many Caribbean countries have not just one, but more than one free-to-air station now. So it is a level of social responsibility that says you cannot just make video content of what is happening here and worldwide only available to those who can afford it. And when I say afford it, I mean people could then go and watch something streaming, because streaming does have a cost. It's not free unless you're in an area where you have free Wi-Fi access. So in order to fulfill your social responsibility, you cannot just shut it down. So if you want to be responsible as a government and keep your people informed, and also which allows your country to progress, you then have to then be able to offer other alternative revenue streams that will allow the entity to be able to pay its way. Why do I say pay its way? Because it is possible, but it's only possible if it is allowed to be able to upgrade and come out of the 20th century and come into the 21st century. Because a lot of what they do is really 20th century in its framework. Now, this legislation, as you know, would have come about because CBCU has been around since the 1960s. So this is not a new piece of legislation. And certainly in an area of technology, where technology changes, and you want to ensure that you can change with it, sometimes you have to change the legislation. Someone may say, well, why are you changing and going to a CEO? Because it's quite simple. When you're doing a restructure, your restructure oftentimes asks or requires, excuse me, Mr. Deputy President, requires that you have a structure which allows you to change what some people currently do. So their jobs will change somewhat, but not in a manner where they're not able to do it. Because the CBC has extremely good staff. Most of the people at CBC know what they're doing. They're good at what they do. And they're quite capable and competent people. What I think sometimes stops people sometimes from being able to do what is required is because they don't have the tools that they need to work with. It's like a carpenter building a house, Mr. Deputy President. In the days now of electric and tools, and you have electric saws and power drills, you don't go and build a whole house with a hand saw and a drill where you have power screwdrivers, because technology allows you now to be able to do these things. So if we can accept it and understand it when it comes to building something like a house, so we're not opposed to people using electric saws. There is for certainly within a technology framework, with a technology-based enterprise, clearly, Mr. Deputy President, that too must obtain. And in this instance, it is such. So you need to restructure also how people's jobs relate then back to the technology. And let me just give an example. I'll just give one. Years ago, you had something called a cinematographer. And even within the government service, even the government information service still has the position as well, a cinematographer. There's no such thing as a cinematographer in broadcasting today. Because cinematographers were people who use 16mm film, Mr. President, or any kind of film. But people have not used film in years. They went from 16mm all the way to beta, which is a whole other technology that's no longer used either, which is really the strangest thing. So these cinematographers, then some of them actually, one or two, might become videographers, because we're talking about video. You would remember this, Mr. Deputy President, the days when you had a little VCR. Some of the young ones in here, I don't think you even know what a VCR is. Yeah. and they would put in a little tape, and that was a VHS tape that most people had in their homes. But Mr. Deputy President, certainly in the television environment, they had beta. That was the tape and the technology developed by Sony. That was the most prevalent within most broadcasting outlets. And that, then these people became videographers. But even that is no longer the case, because now the technology allows you to be able to use what looks basically like the same type of thing to do so many different things. And if you do not continue to move forward in a modern framework, you are left behind. And you cannot allow CBC to be left behind and only allow then private enterprise to move forward, because they are moving forward with the changes of the world. And we want to move CBC forward with the changes of the world and to empower their staff with the same advantages, the same ability to do what a lot of their colleagues do that work at other entities are currently doing. And I think I explained earlier, and I know all the people that know, and I don't like to speak about competitors or about business people or places in this forum, but there are people who would do the same thing that CBC does, and I used a newspaper earlier to show that they are currently doing it. So you cannot let CBC not have that same advantage. Of course, that media house is a private entity, and it doesn't have an act. When it was formed, there was no act that said what they could or could not do, and there was not a description that explained what it was that they were supposed to do, which is the case here with the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. And so I hope that, Mr. President, this explanation that I've given, I've tried to keep it as non-technical as possible and to speak in terms that would be understood, is this amendment is a situation where we are trying to empower the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. We are trying to ensure that it keeps abreast not just with its competitors here locally, but what is happening Caribbean-wide. And you can go, and I invite anyone, Mr. President, who is able to watch me streaming, because that's what we're using in here. We are not using a link back to free-to-air. This is a stream, but it's still a broadcast in many sense, because anyone can watch this as long as they have a computer or a cell phone or anything else. And so those within here that are watching would understand what I'm talking about, because they know these cameras here in this room are showing them what we're in here doing. Years ago in this same chamber, when you want to see a Senate debate, Mr. Deputy President, you had to tune in to CBC TV8. But you don't do that anymore. Why? Because CBC, as I said, the technology they're using is old, so it makes it expensive. CBC will do something called a live broadcast. And they have a bus. They call it an OB bus, an outside broadcast bus. To move that bus from here to there, you probably cannot do it under $5,000. it could be as much as, and tends to be around 7,000 or 8,000, just to move it, to go and do a live event. But if we change the platforms in which they operate and give them access to these other things, well, those expenses will be cut probably down to maybe around 1,500. So it clearly, I don't think it takes too much understanding of the technology itself. You, Mr. Deputy President, you only need to understand the dollars and cents of what it allows you to do, that then would then frame whether or not you think this amendment, piece of legislation, is as necessary as I know it is. And so, sorry, Mr. Deputy President, I don't know. I thought I heard something in the wilderness, but it's probably technology, you know, because you do have these little glitches where you hear these things, these little things, you know. Oh, sounds like that again. I don't know, Mr. Deputy President. It sounds like a Spanish station in and out all the time. I'm not sure. Anyhow, Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, so the definition of broadcasting, which is both within the CBC Act as well as in the Broadcasting Act, must act in concert. You cannot have legislation where one thing says one thing and the other thing says something else. So once you change one, you must change the other to make sure that they are in concert. And in this case, that is why the Broadcasting Act too must be amended in terms of the definition of what constitutes broadcasting to keep both of them synonymous. Now, Mr. President, with those, Mr. Deputy President, with those very few, short, concise, and I hope words that clearly articulate the rationalization because the rationalization for why we are in here today to change these two pieces of legislation have been made clear. And with those few words, I beg that this bill be read a second time.
Senator Moore, happy to recognize you as our next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President, and I apologize to those of you in this honorable chamber and the 17 that I understand are watching us via live streaming. 15 now. I wasn't going to speak, not only because you'd recognize it was a little difficult, but I was intrigued as the Honorable Senator was leading out on the issue, and she spoke about restructuring. Restructuring that allows you to change what some people do. I was happy to hear the recognition that we have a number of capable and competent people at the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. But restructuring to allow you to change what some people do and to relate people's jobs back to the technology. Now, I'm all for the technology and I'm all for systems that will seek to bring us into the 21st century and recognizing where we've been lagging and so on. But you know, when one speaks about restructuring, there are also some very contemporary terms that come to mind. Terms such as employee engagement, terms such as communication. And I find it ironic, Mr. President, that we would be speaking about a Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. We would be speaking about improving technology and systems so that we can reach out more to the public, the viewership. And it would seem that to be have not focused on the contemporary issues and changes that would speak to our internal publics at the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. One might wonder what I'm speaking about. And we don't have to look too far back. Just a few days ago, we had at the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation a demonstration of sorts by the internal publics. Some people call it a sit-in, where arising out of negotiations, where we were discussing a restructuring about a year ago, and there was agreement reached that there would be some payments made to staff. Payments over a 42-month period, Senator Franklin. You know, the bonds and things that you don't like. Payments over a 42-month period, and that's recognition of a situation, a financial constraint that the government faced while trying to honor a commitment to staff. And we're very appreciative of the commitment to pay staff. But when it became difficult for those payments to be made, within the time frame, the monthly time frame that they were to be made, we recognized that staff wasn't hearing anything from anybody. Communication.
No broadcasting.
No internal broadcasting, Mr. President. And it is only when staff reacted that the management started to connect to the fact that maybe we should actually speak to the people about why they're not seeing their payments. We've heard about the pensioners, those who were retrenched about a year ago, those who've reached pensionable age, not receiving their pensions. I heard, was out to the island, and I don't read the news when I'm in or out to the island, but I heard that there were some of them going to the other media houses to indicate that nobody was doing anything for them, not even the unions. I don't know if they also indicated to those media houses that they never involved the unions. But our communication to our people is important. So there's a term in engagement, employee communication, where you speak about meeting in the middle. And meeting in the middle really is about bringing people into the changes that we are contemplating so that people actually feel a part of the changes and that you can get buy-in before rolling out changes. So what I find interesting about the changes that we are discussing here today, not that in themselves they might be harmful, but up to now, the people have not been let into the changes. Mr. President, I happen to be aware that after over a year of a new board being in place at the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, that the employees and their representatives, I am not saying or, deliberately saying and, the employees and their representatives have not had a chance to meet with the board of the CBC. That the employees on their own have not had a meeting with their chairman, and this is the second one. They didn't have a meeting with the first one either. That the union did not have a chance representing those employees on its own, has not had a chance to meet with the board. But yet we are discussing changes that are impacting people, the very capable and competent people that we have at the CBC. So when I hear about these changes, and although I offer no criticism for the changes in themselves, but recognizing that they're not being supported by actions where it matters most, Uncle Shakespeare comes to mind. A rose by any other name, still a rose, still smells like a rose. Or, if I will quote him more fully, you can dress up his treasonous actions with whatever heroic descriptors you like, but it still remains treason. A rose by any other name, as they say. Honestly, I don't care if they end up changing the name of my town. A rose by any other name would smell as sweet, and this will always be home. So what is in a name? The minister under the current act can direct what functions the general manager may perform. The minister under the current act may direct how much a general manager is paid. So as it relates to the changes to the CBC Act, there's no real significance in changing to a CEO over a general manager, because whether it's a CEO, a general manager, a managing director, an executive chairman, whatever it is, they will perform the functions as directed, as approved by the minister. And they will be paid as approved by the minister. So those changes are cosmetic, and they're saying to us that they really have no significance. Guess if they're changing the broadcasting and the technology and whatever, we sound impressive, but we appear less impressive when we are making changes only at the top, without reference to people in the middle and at the bottom, the people that can really make or break, make good on or bad of the changes that are being contemplated. So, Mr. President, I didn't signal you 10 minutes at the start, but I don't know how much further my voice will take me. I only wish for the honorable senator who led on the issue, who happens to be the honorable minister responsible for the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, to give attention to the few words that I have offered by way of advice. And every time I stand, I don't regard myself as extreme independent or extreme anything else. But I regard myself as one who wants to see Barbados do well, as one who wants to see workers getting by after some time of oppression. That time of oppression has not ended, but I want to see it come to an end. So I want to see real people connecting, or real people seeing that there's some ease or there's some positive change in the reality that they have been enduring. And that's not only in dollars and cents. That's in basic respect, engagement, communication. And I would like to see that it starts with a broadcasting corporation in Barbados. I thank you.
Questions? Time has come for you to respond. Senator, yes, I recognize you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise this afternoon, extreme government senator. And I am going to suggest, Mr. President, my intervention will be 10 minutes. Because I would want to lend my support to the presentation by the Honorable Senator and the Minister responsible for broadcasting on these two matters before the Senate this afternoon. And I'm going to follow on from Senator Moore's intervention by first of all supporting her call for improved communication. After all, we're talking about a broadcasting function. We're talking about communications, really. And therefore, we would all agree in the chamber that we need to ensure that we lead by example in this particular corporation or in this particular discipline relative to how we interface with our employees. So I support that 100%. Mr. President, we've had a lot of debate today, setting context, persons taking us back to periods in the past and the mismanagement that we have seen. And if there's one thing I recall so glaringly of that period was the lack of communication. We oftentimes within the private sector had to suffer as a result of not even being able to have our regular social partnership meetings. I think that they dwindled down to maybe once a year, and if at all. And therefore, we know too well, Mr. President, the issues of lack of communication. And I want to support that this administration will be different, and therefore will ensure that we take persons into our confidence, as has been the case, I would want to suggest, led by our own Prime Minister, taking our citizens into her confidence, our ministers doing the same relative to the aligned ministries and so on. So I would want to support that this is what differentiates us, and so we need to maintain that. So if there's a need for improved communication, I'm sure that the Minister here of Broadcasting has heard that and will definitely make sure that that is maintained and corrected. But why am I supporting the proposals before us? We heard earlier, Mr. President, the fact that this is a digital age. This is a technological age, and therefore we need to bring our institutions, our processes, we need to bring the delivery of our services, the development of our goods and so on, into that reality. Now, as I sat there, I looked around the room and I said, you know, I'm going to ask the question really, how many of us watch CBC? And I'm sure I will not see 50% of the hands go up in this chamber.
Did not.
Because the facts are that technologies have changed, the way we receive information has changed, the way we view programs, movies, news, etc. has changed, and it is unfortunate that our lone television station, broadcasting station, has not changed. And that to me is something worthy of consideration this afternoon, and that's why we are having this kind of debate and why we are looking to make the amendments. We have to bring this organization into a modern environment and a modern way of doing business, so that if I had to ask that question again in the future, all the hands in this room will go up, not only one, but two, because why? We understand and appreciate and we embrace now this institution. We welcome the delivery of products and services. We actually enjoy watching our television station and listening to our radio programs and so on. But the facts are that very few of us tune in. And therefore, we have to change that. So I understand that the amendment before us is to redefine how we consider broadcasting, to be able to empower the board and the management and staff with the ability to employ those technologies that would allow for CBC to bring news and to bring programming and so on in real time, right? And using the platform that we can definitely enjoy the programs, etc. So I think that all of us have to agree that this is a step in the right direction. But the substantive point for me this afternoon is the issue really of our staff and structure and seeking to modernize that. Because as I said before, Senator Moore gave a very good presentation. I actually had to sit here and realize that she's very technical in her language. So, you know, she's really, yes, she's very, very technical. She spoke like a specialist in the field. But yes, she has been in broadcasting and media and marketing now for a while. So there's no need for me to even try to repeat that. But I want to address the issue, Mr. President, of the staffing issue. Because a part of the amendment is to be able to treat to new roles, treat to new positions and so on, that again, one may suggest refers to that modern construct. I'm not going to quote Shakespeare. But I would remind the chamber of a gentleman named John Maxwell. He is noted as a leadership guru of our time, of our season. And John Maxwell is noted to have said that everything rise or fall on leadership. Things rise or fall on leadership. So in other words, he is proposing that leadership is germane to the success not only of institutions, to the success of countries, to the success of processes, whatever it is, that it depends a lot on leadership. And so our effort to try to ensure we employ the right kind of leadership models and the right kind of leadership structures across our state-owned enterprises in particular, I think, Mr. President, ought to be applauded, because we're doing this against the backdrop that we understand the significance of leadership to the success of an institution, the significance of leadership to the success of an organization. Now, I would like to think that when we consider the function of a CEO, that it goes beyond just the minister or anyone just giving a directive or setting even their salaries and so on. But you are empowering such senior posts to be able to set the strategic direction for the institution and to be able to guide based on the policy directives. You're empowering them, you're giving them more autonomy and authority to be able to manage and govern the organization. And Mr. President, I dare say that is what we need today. So, be it a CEO, be it an executive chairman, be it a managing director, we need to be able to empower our senior professionals to strategically lead the institutions that they are so charged with. And so I want to support this against the backdrop of the importance of leadership to the institution. Now, Mr. President, CBC has been losing ground for a while. It's a fact. I mean, the mere fact that we in here don't even watch, well, we watch it now. But before that, we didn't watch it before. CBC has been losing ground for a while, Mr. President. Here are the facts. In 2006, CBC had debt at about $89 million. This rose in 2007 to 72. But would you imagine, Mr. President, that by 2017, this rose to $100 million? $100 million. And therefore, this institution continued to leverage. Yes, continue to hemorrhage year after year after year. Somebody will say, I don't know. I'm not going to suggest that there's been lots of persons added to the payroll and you know, the increased cost, the operating costs and so on, coming from the increase in staff may have contributed. I do not know what the issues are. But what I do know is that the organization moved from a debt of $72 million in 2007 to over $100 million by 2017. And that debt continued to grow. That debt continued to increase. What I can also say, Mr. President, is that the brand, the CBC brand, has been declining in the marketplace. That when you do your polling, when you engage persons relative to their perception of this brand, that the information coming back constantly is one that is negative, suggesting that persons are not patronizing the brand. You know, where do I get that from? Many of you would remember that one of the first things that this administration did as a part of its governance model was to conduct a survey amongst citizens relative to their perception of key agencies, and if these agencies were considered essential, if these agencies were considered highly desirable, but maybe it can be done in a different way, or, you know, if a different model should be considered and so on. I can't remember all the terms, Mr. Deputy President, but this survey was undertaken as a part of that governance process, because where you wanted to embrace the perceptions and the views and so on of the average citizen relative to how do we go about addressing some of the issues in our country. Mr. President, there were about 5,000 Barbadians that took the time. I saw the survey. It was long. I'm not going to kid you, Mr. Deputy President. It was a long survey. So it could easily take about 1 hour to complete. Easily. And about 5,000 Barbadians participated in that survey. And the information from that, Mr. Deputy President, suggests that the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation obtained the lowest score in that survey from Barbadians, from citizens in this country, indicating to me that the brand had deteriorated so much that those who participated in the survey were of the view that this institution is no longer essential, that you really ought to look for a different model, a different management model, a different, maybe even a different ownership structure for this particular institution. That is how Barbadians felt about the CBC. And so given such a response to that survey, it was therefore incumbent on government to look to see, well, how do we treat the CBC? How do we modernize it? We've made a decision as an administration that we are not going to divest of it. We're not going to privatize it. We're going to maintain this within government's control. But we have to look at how it is managed, how it is governed, how it is structured. And so these amendments to the legislation are intended at least to begin that process. But it ought to be noteworthy by everyone in this chamber that of all of the state-owned enterprises, all of the agencies of the state-owned enterprises, matter of fact, of all, sorry, Mr. Deputy President, of all the agencies that were in that survey, CBC scored the lowest. I don't have who scored the highest. I looked for CBC. I wanted to see where CBC was at. But it scored the lowest. So I therefore support the view that we need to look at the structure. We need to look at the management structure. We need to look at how we model this organization, the embracing technology and so on. And my final thought then, and I'm sorry that Senator Franklin is not in his chair, not in his seat. But my final thought is that I want to encourage our unions, our trade unions, our partners in this process to work with us in this effort. And what do I mean by that? I took Senator Moore's comments earlier and I agreed with her that we need to improve our communication. But I also want, Mr. Deputy President, for us as a Barbadian society to go beyond just simply accepting what we know to be presenteeism in our organizations and work hand in hand to encourage a level of improvement relative to productivity and output in our organizations. And we need our unions to help us with this. Because we're talking about a change in culture and a change in our work ethic. We have, Mr. Deputy President, situation after situation, and we know of them. I do not believe that Senator Moore will condone this, so I know that she will agree with me. I can't speak for anybody else in the chamber. I can speak for Senator Moore, I believe. But she will not condone just simply going into a boardroom to negotiate on the behalf of one of her members, fighting tooth and nail when she knows that the person committed the act, but maybe on a technicality. Maybe on a technicality you can argue a particular point. Huh? I know that she will not go into that place knowing that the individual committed the act. But there may have been a slight technicality in the process of the HR manager or the HR department and so on in processing the issue or treating the issue and argue tooth and nail for that technicality and allow the individual to return to work the next day knowing that they committed the act. I know that she will not do that. And I am there saying that we need, Mr. Deputy President, for our trade unions to work with us, not to condone wrong behavior in organizations and seek to get off people just on technical flaws within the process. But we need to ensure that we get productivity coming from our people. And this is a concern, Mr. Deputy President, that I have. You would have a camera in an area, huh? And the camera is zooming in on a particular department or a particular group of people or a particular area. And you can see from the recordings of the camera that a person did a particular thing. Mr. Deputy President, you don't know that someone would then come and want to argue some technical area that maybe the camera might not have been in the right angle or the camera was not on when it's supposed to be on. The camera is supposed to be on at 3 to 5, but it happened to be on at 2. Huh? It happened to be on at 2, so the person was caught in the act. And you want to argue that it was on at 2 when it's supposed to be on at 3, ignoring the fact that the individual actually committed the particular crime. These are the kinds of things that we are hearing. This is the kind of things happening. And persons getting off, and you actually will hear an employee, call a particular union and say to them, I want you to represent me because I know that you get off people on technical matters. I am saying, Mr. Deputy President, that we have to work cooperatively now, government, trade union, private sector, to address the productivity issues in our country, or what someone has penned as presenteeism. Because you have people coming to work, they're showing up, they're present there, but they're not producing. They're not working. This is having a negative impact and effect on our society and our ability, Mr. Deputy President, to grow as an economy. So yes, there will be other debates, I am sure, in this chamber on the issue of changing nomenclature, and the issue of the new roles and positions and so on that may be introduced for several state-owned enterprises and the like. Let us have those debates. And when we do, Mr. Deputy President, let us also remember, please, that John Maxwell says things rise or fall on leadership, and that we want to keep top of mind that we are about creating a culture where we promote productivity, where persons are engaged. I love that concept. Where persons are engaged to do their best to contribute and so on to the organization, and that as employers, we're going to do our best to provide that conducive environment that persons can produce. But that is what we're aiming for, because at the end of the day, we want to have the kind of GDP, the kind of output in our goods and services that will help our economy to grow. That is what it's about, Mr. Deputy President. So I really want to support these amendments. I support the minister relative to bringing to us at this time the need for modernizing the CBC and putting the kind of management structure in place that would really empower and incentivize persons to lead now at a higher level. I think that this is a step in the right direction, and with those words, Mr. Deputy President, I'm obliged to you. 10 minutes, yes.
Thank you. And that is your first speech as Dr. Lynette Holder. All right, good. Senator Moore, you're up. Anybody else talking?
Senator Moore.
Mr. President, I want to thank my colleague, Senator, as well as my other colleague, Senator Moore, for her instructive comments with regard to some of the deficiencies that currently exist within the relationship between the CBC and certainly the union representatives at the corporation. And moving forward, because, it's always good to hear feedback from individuals so you would know what you need to do in order to move forward, not just with technology, but also with human resource. So I take the comments as instructive ones. And I would say that certainly if you are in a communication environment, that communication then must be paramount. Nevertheless, Mr. President, the ability to bring CBC into a modern framework and to modernize the entity, as was clearly articulated by Senator Holder, is a must. She's quite correct, Senator Holder is quite correct, when she's Dr. Senator Holder is quite correct when she
explained about the survey taken by Barbadians, where CBC did not score very well. Not only because one must remember that an entity that not only was it well over $100 million in debt, but it also was losing somewhere in the tune of about $17 million a year. That's a lot of money to lose. But then how is that money then recovered and supported? Certainly not by advertising in Barbados. There are not enough business people or advertisers to cover that type of monetary loss. There are only 300,000 Barbadians. It is not possible. So then what happens? It becomes a burden then to the taxpayers, to the state. Because that is the only way then to cover those expenditures. So yes, I did listen to Senator Moore, and yes, sometimes certainly governments in an IMF program sometimes are not always able to quickly put their hands on ready funding. But nevertheless, once a commitment is made by this government, one can rest assured that we will honor it. We are not in the habit of not honoring our commitments, as we have shown, clearly shown, since we have come to government. I recall when I first became the minister responsible for the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation, the staff were being paid late every month. Can you imagine, Mr. President? Every single month, the staff at the CBC were being paid late. I am sure, Mr. President, that Senator Moore and Senator Franklin and all the wonderful union personnel in our society who I have the utmost respect for, that may have membership at CBC, will say the staff are no longer being paid late. They're being paid on time. Now, with regard to certainly the issue that Senator Moore spoke about, yes, but the staff were paid, as was a commitment made by government. And yes, the money did not come from the CBC, because the CBC was not in a position to pay the money. It came from the government. When one is not able to pay your bills, then you have to look elsewhere. And so CBC as an entity is not in a position, because it's not making money. It is not making money. It is losing money every single year of its operation. And the only way, Mr. President, to stop that bleed of money loss is to modernize the CBC, to look at the structures that the modernization then embraces, and ensure that they become more productive and more efficient, Mr. President, because only in that way will the entity be able to progress and survive in an extremely demanding and competitive marketplace that we see in the modern communications, information, technology of today. That is the only way. And so it's because of this, Mr. President, that the CBC changes to the Act, where we are now introducing a framework that will empower individuals to be able to ensure that that occurs. Now, I didn't mention it earlier, Mr. President, but just to say in my wrap-up that one never wants to see job losses that occurred last year, which occurred at CBC. But CBC was the most overstaffed media entity, number 5 in the entire world, Mr. President. The CBC complement, which is part of what would have incurred some of its expenditure for the size of our market. We have 300,000 people maximum in Barbados. I think last survey said 282,000. So I just, rounded off. Had more workers than media entities just like it, that would have had a television station, the radio stations and stuff, that were servicing markets of 35 million and more. And CBC TV 8, which, as I explained earlier, Mr. President, is a free-to-air entity, had more people than entities where in their free-to-air grade A radius had at least 30 million. And by the time you look at the grade B radius, in other words, the secondary radius, almost 50 million. Now, how can that be? And how can you maintain and continue that? Plus $1 million debt, a recipe, Mr. President, for disaster. We don't want that, Mr. President. What we want is to ensure that CBC is a viable entity that will continue on by not just doing what it does today, but continue as other entities similar to it are doing and broaden its base of what it offers in terms of services to the people of Barbados. And this amendment will allow for that to occur. There's no doubt in my mind that this is a step in the right direction. It is a step in the right direction. I said earlier, and I will say again, the CBC has very competent individuals. What we're trying to do here is to allow those individuals to be able to do the work that needs to be done by also using the technology that we're trying to provide to make, one, their jobs easier. I gave the example earlier. It is easier to use an electric saw than a hand saw. If not, they wouldn't bother with electric saws. Everything in the world changes for efficiency purposes. When I first started to drive many years ago, and right into when I was an adult and young adult, they had carburetor engines in cars. And cars were stick shift. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. President, it wasn't any days of the crank handles. I would perhaps have to add some. I wasn't any days of the crank handles, but certainly any days of carburetor engines, and people had manual shift cars. I learned to drive on a manual car with a carburetor engine, so I can drive a manual car. Most people today don't even know what you're talking about when you're talking about a manual car, Mr. President. You would have to like racing and go to Formula One or something of that nature to know about manual cars and any other type of racing. So the same we can go from carburetor engines to fuel injection. The same we can go from unleaded gas from leaded gas to unleaded gas for efficiency. Well, clearly, in a technology-based enterprise, you have to improve what the technology is that you're using and allow those that are using it to be empowered to be able to make their jobs too easier, because it does make it easier. You know, years ago in television and our radio, they used to have something called a potential media, which will allow you to go up and down, and it was a board that would allow you then, when you're playing music, to go from music to voice and all that. People don't do that anymore. Every radio station is run now with a computer. What potential media are you talking about? That's 20th century technology. Yeah, and I said, I didn't want to get into too much detail, but even right down to cameras. You have remote cameras now. That's what people are using. Not some of the cameras that I sometimes see up at the CBC. So the reality is, efficiency oftentimes requires changes, not just in technology, changes in your management structure, because that is what the modern world calls for you to remain competitive. Barbados wants to continue to be competitive in what it does, in every aspect of what it does. I don't want to compare myself with countries that are not competitive and that are struggling. That is not what Barbados is all about. And that's not what, Mr. President, that is not how Barbadians view themselves. Barbados is one of the few countries that I know of in the Caribbean that has free education all the way to university level, to allow its citizens to be able to be competitive any and everywhere, not just here within our own confines of 166 square miles, but if we choose to go elsewhere, we are then as competitive as anyone else. And that is all that we are asking for here with the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation. We want, as Senator Holder said, Mr. President, earlier, we want viewership, and viewership requires real-time activity. People want instant, real-time activity. They want to be able to see something as it happens. Even if they see it later on the evening news at night, they still want to see it in real time. And real time requires the ability to do just that, and not what is occurring right now. And I can say that once we make these changes, clearly we will continue to empower the staff as well. I know whether it is trainings or whatever else is required, we will always continue to empower people to make them not just productive, but better informed, and what then makes you a better person when you have knowledge. So, my final comment on this, Mr. President, is that the CBC, as it exists today, a large entity with varied employees, and yes, as someone pointed out, is run by a board. I was listening to some comments made earlier, Mr. President, and I thought it was the minister that's running CBC. It is not. It is run by a board, and a very competent board, and a competent chairman of the board. And it has competent staff. It really does have competent staff. All these people require is, as I say, the same tools you give a carpenter to work with to complete his job. They want that same ability to move CBC forward, upward, and forward. So with those few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that the bill under consideration, Caribbean Broadcasting Amendment Bill 2019, be now read a second time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Move forward on the line without leaving
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now lead the chair, and the Senate resolve itself into a committee of the whole
You
Senate
don't have enough?
for the further consideration of this bill in committee. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and we are now in committee.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Move that clause 1 stand part.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that clause 1 stand part.
The question is that clause 1 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. President, I beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
The question is that clause 2 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. President, I beg to move that clause 3 stand part.
The question is that clause 3 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Mr. President, I beg to move that clause 4 stand part.
The question is that clause 4 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 5.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Clause 5 stand part.
The question is that Clause 5 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 6.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Clause 6 stand part.
The question is that Clause 6 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 7.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Clause 7 stand part.
The question is that Clause 7 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 8.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Clause 8 stand part.
The question is that Clause 8 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Report the passing of
Mr. Deputy President, I do now move that your reporters honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report is honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passes of the bill under consideration, order number 5 on the order paper. The Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation Amendment Bill 2019 in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the bill now be read a third time.
Question is that this bill under consideration be now read a third time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Think the ayes have it. Pass it and so forth.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation Amendment Bill the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation Amendment Act 2019.
The question is that the bill under consideration be to now pass and be cited as the Caribbean Broadcasting Corporation Amendment Act 2019. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it. The bill is now being passed and will be so cited.
Order number 6, sir. In the name of Senator the Honorable Miss Elsie Moore, Minister of Information, Broadcasting and Public Affairs, to move the second reading of the Broadcasting Amendment Bill 2018.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that the bill, item number 6 on the order paper, the Broadcasting Amendment Bill 2019, be now read a second time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. I do now leave the chair.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself in committee.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate for the further consideration of this bill in committee. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and we are now in committee.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. President, I beg to move that clause 1 stand part.
The question is that clause 1 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. President, I beg to move that clause 2 stand part.
The question is that clause 2 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, Mr. Deputy President, I'm sorry, I beg to move that you now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passage of the bill under consideration in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the bill now be read a third time.
The question is that the bill under consideration be now read a third time. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that the bill now pass and be cited as the Broadcast Amendment Act 2019.
The question is that the bill under consideration do now pass and be so cited. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it, and the bill has now been passed as the Broadcast Amendment Act 2019. What more?
So you can take a 10-minute break.
Say the date.
You realize that, listen.
Yes. Yeah, I just-
I thought we were going to do at least 2 or 3 we create and then adjourn.
Once Kate has adjourned, just let her know that dinner in order.
Mr. President, I beg to move that we adjourn this sit-in as sine die.
Question is that this sitting be now adjourned without a day appointed. All honorable members in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. And we are now adjourned without a day appointed. Thank you.